Over the last few years, I've been playing, or rather researching, a lot of RPG games. I've always had an interest in making games, and what better way to learn about them than to actually play them, right? Now, oftentimes, there's just so much out there to play that it can be a tad bit overwhelming. That's when I head to YouTube and see what others have felt about the games that I'm interested in, and that usually helps me make a decision on whether or not I play it. I mean, this is something we all do to save some precious hours of our lives. We don't all have 15 extra hours in the week just to see if we like the game or not. Anyways, this is a glimpse into my experience playing Divinity 2 over the last year, and hopefully it may help some of you who haven't got around to playing it yet. Divinity Original Sin 2 is an RPG developed and published by Larian Studios. It's a sequel to 2014's Divinity Original Sin, which was released for Windows in 2017. It's really cool that you can play the game on PlayStation, Xbox One, Switch, and macOS, even on the iPad. The game was a huge success, selling over 1 million copies in 2 months. It's often accredited as being one of the best role-playing games of all time due to its combat and interactivity. The game was first announced on the 12th of August in 2015. The game was funded from a Kickstarter they launched a little later that year. The Kickstarter did extremely well and reached its $500,000 goal in less than 12 hours. By the end of their funding campaign, they had raised around $2 million. This is honestly what surprised me the most about Divinity. The fact that they were able to make such a great game with only a $2 million budget. It's insane. Now I know $2 million might sound like a lot, but in game development, it really isn't. These AAA game budgets are mind-boggling, and over recent years, that's been steadily increasing. I'm talking about 50, 80, sometimes even $100 million goes into the development of these big titles. The game's music was composed by Borislav Slavov, who replaced former series composer Kirill Pokrovsky, who passed away in 2015. The game was released for early access in 2016 and was fully released by 2017. Supposedly, there was a power outage at Larian's development studio on the day of launch, but regardless, the game was successfully released and had a concurrent player count of 75,000 within the first week after launch, making it one of the most played games on Steam at the time. And by the way, Divinity Original Sin 2 takes place around 1,000 years after the first game, so it's not necessary to play the first game to understand it. Now, my playthrough. As soon as I bought it, I jumped into the game with me and my bros. I thought the intro was epic, and I'm a big D&D head, so I was excited to experience RPG storytelling and a shared co-op experience, which brings me to the first point that I loved and sometimes hated about Divinity, which was the co-op system. Let me start off by saying this was an amazing addition to an already good game. Being able to share stories with friends is something I always look for in games. On top of that, due to its simple drop-in, drop-out mechanics, I wasn't limited to my friends being in the game with me. If I wanted to play a little extra throughout the week, or even if I hopped in before them, they could just open up their game and load into the world. While gone, I could take control of all the idle characters, or simply leave them there for when they came back. You could even fight each other. The party system was rather easy to use. I did notice that if we're not in the same party, their actions would no longer affect me, which was rather important. One thing you should know about my little coterie is that they love to attack NPCs. The amount of times they threw fire at guards or tried to steal from traders, I can't even count. I started not directly sticking together with everyone because I kind of saw it all coming. I only really came around to bail them out after a fight breaks out. Player death is one thing to consider, and this is why I always say save often, but in the case that you can't or haven't saved, it's pretty easy to revive fallen teammates in the early game if you just use resurrection scrolls. However, those can be expensive and you will inevitably run out of them, so the one other quick and easy method I used was changing my game's difficulty to easy from settings. This gives you a free unlimited use res scroll, but it can't be used in combat, so hit the flee option or just run away as fast as you can, double back, res, and dip. Now I know all you video game purists out there are shaking in your boots keeping it on one difficulty and all that, but yeah, my party dies a lot, and it got to the point where it was we're gonna sit here and someone's not gonna be playing for hours, or we res them. There were two things that I disliked about co-op, one being how long player turns take. This is to be expected though, and can't really be considered a dislike all the way, but while playing turn-based games, it's gonna take a minute for combat. This ultimately led me to playing through most of the game on my own, though because my party wasn't all that interested, at least not in the long run like me. Speaking of which, Divinity is rather long. I found a lot of people saying they disliked playing it as a co-op game and loved it as a single player, partly due to its size, which isn't exactly what I felt, but I definitely get where they're coming from. And second was the limited party size. If you don't already know, my gaming group is typically like 5 players, and the party size capacity of most games is a large determining factor on whether or not we all play them. There are some mods that have been created for this purpose in Divinity, however, I found them rather difficult to use, and still they wouldn't allow the expanded party members to play through all the events of the story with us, so I ended up sticking with 4. I even started up a discussion on the general Steam forums for Larian's upcoming Baldur's Gate 3, and boy, never have I seen a simple question blow up into such a full-blown internet argument overnight. Yeah, watch out for Steam forums. Continuing on, the graphics are amazing. While I do notice a lot of the same reused assets for the NPCs, the world is just simply, it's beautiful. The story wasn't as compelling as I hoped once I really got into the meat of the game, but that's just my opinion. This isn't to say that the lore isn't great, because it's incredible. There's so many cool bits of dialogue you can uncover if you just look around and like click things. Divinity 2, for some reason, kind of has a sandboxy feel to me. I think it stems from the fact that you can basically do anything to the NPCs. Anybody you kill won't really affect the storyline, and if you accidentally kill a reoccurring character, I read somewhere that they'll just pop back up later. Regardless of your playstyle, there's just so much to do. Source, which is such a big deal, was rather tedious to use until learning to master it. I was always forced to go back to some place and refill my source points to cast certain things or use certain abilities. However, it wasn't too big of a deal for me, maybe because I'm used to that way of thinking in Dungeons & Dragons, where all casters have spell slots or limited uses per day. By the way, I don't suggest you start off with a mixed undead alive party if you're unfamiliar with these types of games. On my first playthrough, it was a pain at times. Just keep in mind that you can't enter cities because people will attack you unless you're wearing Fane's helm. All healing spells will harm undead characters. I had to be especially careful with group healing spells, and the same goes for potions. It will kill your undead character, basically. Poison flasks will heal undead, I believe, and there are some other regenerative methods that can be used. The class system is really chill though. I don't feel too locked in with what I had chosen at the start of the game, because you could always branch out skill-wise and take up new weapons. At the same time, optimizing your character is not necessarily easy. I actually restarted once or twice and started looking up builds for the party. Make use of the respec mirror. Sometimes it's easy to allocate the wrong points and attributes on level ups. For me, I often tweak stats in order to wear certain items. Obviously, I really fell in love with equipment in Divinity. It gives you, certain equipment can give you types of stat bonuses. Basically, these bonuses are really easy to stack, so you can find yourself doing some serious damage by the mid-levels. I think one of the biggest things I disliked about the game was the rather confusing journal system. I found it extremely hard to keep track of individual quests and especially the plot. It would have been really cool if it was easier to understand, because it would have worked so well with the drop-in, drop-out mechanics I mentioned earlier. I found myself many times directing teammates to the journal tab when they got back to see what's been going on, story-wise, since they left, and then I check it myself and I can't even make out everything that's going on. And I played it. Another underrated feature in my opinion is the Game Master mode. GM mode lets one player create and control environments with NPCs, objects, maps, and more for 4 other players to participate in. Basically, it's like being a dungeon master in D&D for 4 players, but you can build environments, maps, and encounters, abilities, all with assets already in Divinity. I thought this was genius. While once again, I would love to see this with a larger party size, I'm just glad they implemented it all. A few tips that I would give to all you would-be adventurers out there. It's not much, it's just some things that helped me out as I played. At your earliest convenience, please grab a bedroll and shovel. The bedroll can literally heal the entire party. Unlimited use when out of combat, so that's a cop. The shovel is extremely useful. I kind of messed up with this early on. I was constantly finding places to dig in and out of, but I didn't get the shovel. A few acts later, I was trying to sneak into a secret entrance, and there was not a shovel on the island. Wasted a bunch of time trying to find one. I learned that if you don't have a shovel, you could just use a lizard. The lizard race can use their claws to shovel as well. Of course, I didn't have a lizard in my party, so I used Fane's Mask of the Shapeshifter to turn into a lizard and do the digging for me. Grabbing some means of teleportation will save you so many headaches later. I found the gloves of teleportation early on at Fort Joy and kept them with me. From clearing environmental obstacles outside of combat, sneak attacks, or even warping dead allies closer to yourself for a quick res, it is probably the most useful ability I found in the game. This goes without saying, but choose your companions wisely. The game is very strategical, partly due to its turn-based battle system, so think ahead to what role you want each party member to fulfill. When it's all said and done, I think Divinity 2 definitely lives up to its name and may very well be one of the best isometric games of the last decade. Even though it's a few years old at this point, it's definitely worth it. I spent countless hours in it, and that's my take. Later, gamers.